Welcome to another episode of the Honest Hounds podcast. We are back. We're back with Sean, and Jess and Jessie. We are talking this week about suppression and depression. So always good to start by defining. Do you want to hit us with a definition of suppression first?
So we looked it up earlier. So
Who lost Gemini?
According to Gemini, suppression is the effort to push uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, memories out of awareness. So we're thinking about mental health. We're thinking about pushing something away so that we're not thinking about it to the fore. And it says it's a negative thing. It's a defense mechanism. I actually think that it could be a useful thing to suppress something. So, for example, we all have thoughts, and Dawn and I have talked quite a few times about people not believing their thoughts. So, for example, if I saw someone that I thought was really attractive and I said those thoughts out loud to them, and that might be like a really negative social thing to do.
Okay, not so acceptable.
Yeah, so suppressing those thoughts because they're irrelevant. I'm thinking about if they were a married man or something,
Okay.
right? So I've got thoughts and I'm like, well, it's irrelevant in this situation, suppress those thoughts. Or if you've got thoughts that, you can have thoughts that are negative, you can have thoughts that are positive, thoughts that are daydream, but it's not real life. And if we believe our thoughts constantly, we can get ourselves into trouble.
I suppose a lot of the mindset focus is about kind of suppressing negative things. If you were constantly thinking I'm not good enough or I'm an imposter or things like that, I guess the advice that you would be given would be to suppress them and not think about them and don't believe them.
And so I think filtering is going to come into this today. So we're filtering things that are going to be negative for the individual and also the group. And the suppression doesn't have to be a negative thing in that, but it can become negative if we're constantly suppressing, if we're living in this state where we're suppressing others or suppressing ourselves and not expressing. So the filtering part is what's healthy to express and what's healthy to suppress.
And how does that align with your day job?
I wasn't ready for you to come to me already. I thought you were going to introduce and then do stuff. I was really not prepared for a question already.
You need to warm up.
Yeah. Well, especially I wasn't ready for you to ask me about my day job. So it sort of aligns in that because I work in mental health, we talk a lot about, especially with people with anxiety, that anxiety lies to you. So part of coping with anxiety is you have to look at those thoughts and say, is this real? Is this not? And what anxiety does is lies to you and tells you it is real. And what we need to sort of help people to do is be able to say, effectively, no, shut up. That's not the thing. Because your anxiety says the world's going to end if you go into Tesco by yourself. And you get built up and built up and built up. Whereas if you can say, I'm just going into Tesco, and you suppress those negative thoughts, that's how you overcome anxiety. It's a lot more complicated than that, a lot longer than that, but that's the short answer when you're not prepared to answer the question.
How do you then pick which thoughts need suppressing and which don't? Because there are some that are valid there, right? Like don't walk out in front of that car, or don't quit your day job to pursue something that you've got no aggression with.
Common sense and reasoning and discussion with other people if it's needed. And that's part of the reason I have a job, is that people with anxiety are struggling to work out which thoughts they need to pay attention to and which ones they don't. So sometimes people come in and they're like, oh, I know it's just my anxiety and that's why this. And sometimes we have to say to them, actually, that's not an anxiety thing. Like, it might be giving you anxiety, but that's very valid that you had a horrific thing happen in your house and you no longer want to stay in your house. And just because you had anxiety about other stuff before, like...
It comes down to reasoning, doesn't it? And not everybody has the ability to reason in that moment. So they need other people to help them with that. And that, I guess that comes from not believing your own thoughts and then asking somebody else for help. When it comes to dogs, that's really tricky because they don't have that ability to ask the questions. All they know is what they've got in that moment. And so if we move on to talking about depression now, so depression comes from having that suppression happen long term, where you might then develop huge anxiety around it. So it calls it a mental health disorder on Gemini. So symptoms include loss of interest in activities, changes in appetite, sleep, fatigue, feelings of worthlessness, and difficulty concentrating. So if we're talking about depression being a mental health disorder, so something that's not conducive to well-being and life-giving, immune-boosting, depression is a state of mind. I guess suppression is too, a suppressed state of mind, but depression would be a long-term state.
It's chronic, I guess.
Yeah.
And then from a chemical point of view, changes in the brain when you have depression, is that some chemistry that's being suppressed by the body?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that in depression we have a downplay of serotonin, oxytocin, all things that all the mood enhancers that make you feel good.
Yeah.
And so we can get stuck and we can get spiraled into that state. So it's like a mental state. And if we're referring back to dogs again, that's difficult. And dogs see, you asked the question to Gemini, can dogs be depressed? Yeah. So they can't express their feelings the same way that humans can, but we can see lethargy and loss of appetite. I think the way that I would see it is lack of interest in others, not doing their natural behaviours, which for dogs is frolicking, exploring. A happy dog tends to be curious and sniffing. So not taking part in those things, just being quiet. And of course, that can sometimes slip under the radar of owners' awareness because that's a good dog, right? A good dog's just one that's just behaving, just going along with it. Doing what needs to be done. So it's a lack of interest in activity that we should be picking up on, going, that's strange, that's different.
And is that both in their own species and with humans as well? So less interest in...
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons that we're obviously doing this podcast is about, if we suppress behaviours enough, if we're not thinking about underlying reasons for behaviour, underlying emotions, we're suppressing the outward behaviours. So for humans, the outward behaviour would be, I'm not going to go up to that man and, hug him and go, hi, you're very sexy to me. That would be outward behaviour. So I'm suppressing the thought. But for a dog that does these behaviours, if we would, so say for example, an over-sexy dog that's marking a law and that wants to stand over dogs and posturing, if we were to constantly be correcting him for that behaviour, we're not changing the underlying chemistry, we're not changing the underlying processes that the dog's going through, so we're suppressing all the outward behaviour, but we could end up with a dog that's then going, well, I can't express that, I might have to do something else, and then that can lead to problems turning in on themselves. So like I've seen dogs do tail chasing and frustration, nibbling their feet until they bleed. They can be destructive, they can start howling. So there's ways of dogs getting rid of stress.
Or it goes the other way and it becomes aggression.
It can become aggression, but it can also become suppress the point in depression where the dog's just not engaging anymore. So it's being suppressed to the point of going, I can't do anything.
I think that comes from a lack of clarity. So, like, what do I do? What is allowed, and does it do nothing?
And that word filter again, I might use the word balance. We find a place where the dog's able to express itself as an individual, and we can understand that it's got needs. It's not maybe appropriate for it to be behaving like this, but where is that coming from? And zooming out and thinking about the bigger picture, what areas of its life have led it to believe that it needs to behave that way? I think other people, and dog owners especially, are perhaps not thinking about the why the dog needs to express himself this way. They just see the behaviour they don't like, and they suppress the behaviour.
And I think it's such an important topic because what we're seeing now is a lot of fallout from that. So I'm sure you've been seeing it for years. It's quite new for me in the last year, kind of doing the residentials. There's been a few dogs that are really stuck in my mind because they're not behaving typically to a lot of the other dogs that we see. So we're getting a lot less of the behaviour and they're kind of holding their stuff, their shit together, but it gets to a point where it kind of comes out. And I guess Atlas is a great example of this because we did it. So our first trainer was very force-free. It was avoid it. And then we had quite a lot of aggression. And then the second suggestion was to correct it. So have him on a slip lead. And if we saw any aggression, to just correct and wait until he stopped. That obviously resulted in the first time that he did it, him actually going, I'll choose to keep fighting this until I actually physically pass out. And so I think what we saw is we did see a reduction in the behaviour to an extent, which we then thought, was it working? So we're like, great, this sucks. We're not happy about doing it, but if it's going to get us a dog that can still keep on living and we can get to the dog that we want, then we'll kind of go through this crap journey together.
There's also the danger of thinking about surface behaviours. And at no point did anyone say to you, what's he feeling? Well, underneath that, why is that happening in the first place?
Well, and the thing that you're told is, well, he just needs to understand that it's a behaviour that's not allowed. So if we add correction, if we add punishment to it, he'll suddenly get this clarity that, oh, it's fine, but we were never teaching him what to do instead. And so we did get a reduction in the behaviour, but when it came out, and this is what I've seen a lot with the residentials, when it came out, it was disproportionately worse. So it's almost like you suppress it, but when it boils over, it absolutely...
Well, I suppose, there's I've been involved for the charity that I ran. I've been involved in lots of different groups, and one of them was young offenders. So we'll give you an example of a young male who had lots of aggression and hostile behaviour towards people. Now we call it anger management programs with people. And it's anger. We don't really talk about dogs being angry. I think Atlas was very angry when I met him.
He absolutely was.
And so if you take a young person, well, this is a Sean question, if you take a young person who's got lots of anger and frustration, there's going to be a root cause, right? But if you suppress that, if you punish him and say, you can't do that, you can't behave like that, and you have to stop doing that, you might have, if you punish enough, you might have that surface behaviour go away. But what's likely to happen?
In people, mostly what happens is they just get better at hiding when they do it. Most of the time it's obviously not quite the same in dogs because they don't have that sort of thought process, but in 99% of people who have that, suppressing it is not going to work because it has the root cause, like you say. What they're mostly going to do is be like, well, what else can I do? They're going to find alternatives, and the alternatives tend to be worse. So we'd see in young people where, okay, you can't bite people, say, for an example. So then like, okay, I can't bite people, I'll bite myself. And it's like, well, no, we don't want you to hurt yourself either. It's like, well, I can't bite you, I can't bite myself. I have nowhere for this emotion to go. I'll just build it up. And then it's a war zone.
There's less of it, but then when it blows up, it blows up more.
So like I said, just before, yeah. Or they hide it, which in humans we can have obviously self-harm happening, where there's that release, that same release of the tension, but the root cause hasn't been identified and hasn't been worked through and helped. So I think that many dog training methods now are to cover up, distract, very much surface behaviours. So we take the behaviour as this is the behaviour, we want to directly affect that. And I think what I try and do instead is go, where's this coming from, and go underneath it, much like with human therapy. Where is it coming from? And we need the history, we need the current and situation environment. We also need to think about that the social status. So it's a really interesting question for you, Sean, because humans don't tend to speak about social status, although it's very prevalent if we think about it, right? So I think that personally, I think there's a lot of young people who are competing with each other and they're trying to find their place. So would you think it's worth to say that they don't have a purpose at that point, and a lot of frustration can come from the lack of purpose?
Lack of identity?
A lack of understanding of purpose more than a lack of purpose. Like we have a weird purpose when we're, assuming we young people, we're talking before 16. We have a weird purpose. We know somewhere in our future our purpose is to, or we're told our purpose is to have a job, earn money, reproduce, exist. We don't have a clearly defined purpose, and it's why you see more depression in people who don't fit the standard bond. It's why people who aren't straight, who don't want to reproduce, who aren't comfortable in their own bodies are more likely to fall into a depression, because they're told they're not allowed to make their own purpose really, like because you're not developed enough to decide on a purpose realistically. Like in my 30s, I'm still not 100% sure. So expecting someone at 16 to is really difficult, but they're given this grand purpose that also feels really pointless, because you're just like, I go to school, I go to work, I get a job, I get married, I have kids. And if that's not what you want to do, you can all sort of, it falls apart. But for most people now, it doesn't also feel attainable. Like buying a house doesn't feel attainable. There doesn't seem to be enough jobs to earn enough money to
So when you have people calling in at your work, what is the kind of, is there a percentage of people that have a particular situation that you can identify that that's a common cause?
So the one of the things I was thinking about while you guys were talking was actually it's why it's most similar to the current trend in men's suicide and why suppression is linked to that so clearly. It's changing very slowly, thankfully, but like women are always been allowed to be emotional. Even if they're perceived negatively, they're expected to be emotional. So one of the big things, one of the big demographics and the key causes we have is we get men in their 40s, 50s, 60s show up and be like, I don't think mental health is real. I blah, 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 blah. This has never happened before. And then you're like, right. So let's talk about something to try and make you like, let's try and get to a point where you did feel good. If you're saying you've got 60 years where you've not had this issue, tell me what you felt like before. Tell me something that used to make you happy. And they're like, I don't know. Go into work? And you're like, right. So the only joy you're telling me you've ever had in your life was work. And like, were you actually happy? Like, and they're like, no, but it was something to do. And you're like, okay. So actually what's happened is you've not felt happy for God knows how long. You've suppressed your feeling of unhappiness until one day you've gone, I can't cope with this anymore. And you're on the phone to me saying, I've attempted to take my own life. I've considered taking my own life. I've tried to get
disproportionate again when it's gone extreme.
Well, and how long have they been depressed undercurrent of that before they got to that point?
And sometimes it's not. They haven't been depressed. They just, because they haven't just been felt like they're allowed to share small amounts of emotion, that's built into depression through the suppression. They've suppressed that. They've not cried when they've needed to. They've not told a friend when they're not feeling great. They've not been allowed to be angry, because that's the other thing that isn't talked about as much, is that men's anger is seen as really violent, and often it can be true, very, very true. We deal with plenty of people that have had to deal with the repercussions of that, but also if that's how you express, people aren't given the safe space to express anger. Like, we are allowed to be angry. It's a natural human feeling, and it's been people.
Do you think men suppress a lot of anger because of the social construct around men?
Yeah. I think it's types of men. You see men that are like, no, I'm a nice person, I never get angry. When they do get angry, again, it's disproportionate. It's someone's cut them off in traffic and the police have brought them to us because they've driven their car into the wall because they're so angry about the fact they've been cut off in traffic. And it's not a natural response, but it's because that anger has never come out in 15, 20 years, because they're like, no, I'm a good person. Good people don't get angry. Good people don't shout. Good people, and it's just not true.
I think that's shifting now for the worse as well, that obviously social media, but we seem to be creating, I was listening to a podcast about it, like a feminine version of man. So like you've gone from men not being able to express their feelings to, well, now you can express your feelings, but you have to do it like a woman would express her feelings, and you can't do it in the way that's natural to you. And so, like you say, you've got guys that are like, well, I can't be the angry bloke down the pub, I've got to be the polite guy. And there's then not that capacity for them to be what is natural, so it's now gone the other way.
Well, it's really interesting because, we're talking about suppression now in a very, in an individual context, it's suppressing thoughts and feelings, and now we're talking about culturally. And with dogs, it's, I don't think it's true, but it's very common for dog owners to be talking about suppression leading to shutdown. Whereas we're now talking about it actually as the shutdown state is a with humans we wouldn't talk about shutdown. Have you heard the term in relation to people?
Only in that it doesn't really ever happen.
Yeah.
So like the actual occurrences of real catatonic shutdown states are so low that we are effectively, we're not told to ignore it, but we're told to question it. Because
and how often are people coming in and throwing that out? Shut down.
Well, we've had, since I've started working there, we've had about 600-700 people, and not one has mentioned a shutdown state. Like, we haven't had an actual shutdown person.
But what we're saying now is that suppression is not likely to be leading to shutdown in humans. We're saying that suppression leads to disproportionate behaviour of anger and aggression. I do the same thing with dogs. I wouldn't say that I see shutdown a lot. I've seen it. It tends to be from dogs that have been brought over from, street dogs in a crate, brought over with no adjustment period into a home where it's expected to be a pet dog. That's where I've mostly seen it, but not a lot. And I would agree that suppression with dogs, I'm seeing when dogs, especially in this last year, I think, because what's changed for me is that I'm dealing with now lots of dogs that have had multiple trainers. And I did before when they're coming in from the visual welfare, from different places. But I wasn't directly speaking with the owners. They weren't handed in, it was my dog effectively, what I wanted. Yeah. And then within days to have, play and endorphins and so on. So the difference is now that owners who'd be working with lots of trainers, and I almost see a fatigue in the owners of I've tried everything, I've done everything, I don't know what else to do. There's still clinging on to hope, but lots of frustration there. And a lot of what they've done is just as you've done. They've gone extremely positive. Of course, I want to be kind to my dogs. I'm going to go in with these kind methods that I'm sold, which is never say no, reward, avoid any conflict whatsoever.
And all the dogs go away.
The dog will outgrow it or whatever. So we've done that, and then they've gone to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, which is find a trainer who uses a prong or an e-collar. And again, we're not judging about tools, but the use of tools. Mm-hmm. So if we're covering up the behaviour with, if you do that, I'm going to give you a punishment, I'm going to give you a consequence that's going to affect your behaviour because you're going to not want to do that behaviour again. We're not talking about root cause. So I've seen a lot of dogs that have had that extreme measure done. The dogs are behaving, but they'll call me because the dog's then had a disproportionate aggressive outburst towards a dog. And they haven't been re-socialised, they haven't had good role models, they're still stuck, and in fact they're even worse than they were because now they've got this, I can't do the thing that was giving me an outlet.
Yeah. And it's just that they're getting their dopamine. If we take away all the dopamine, what are we left with?
Well, we're left with potential depression and chronic stress. And the owners aren't seeing that. They're seeing that we've had progress because the dog isn't doing the thing that I called the trainer about in the first place.
And so why are there some dogs that this does work for? Because there must be dogs out there that people wouldn't continue using the training methodology. So why are there some dogs who you can literally just go, here's some punishment, here's some suppression, and the dog suddenly stops doing the thing that it was doing?
Well, individual variability, I think, as well. So we're speaking about suppression in natural pack of dogs before, which I think is really relevant. So we have to suppress thoughts and feelings. We have to suppress behaviours. So we teach young children not to play with themselves in public. I remember my brother and never I know, but young boys, that's what they do. They go, I want to be naked. I want to do this thing, and we teach them that's not appropriate, right? So that's a behaviour that's just not good manners to do. However, you don't have to never place yourself. Just don't do it in this situation. You see,
like you can't be examples, Nick.
Well, no, I think it's a good example because actually it's a sensible suppression. It's not. Yeah. It's exactly what we want in a suppression. A suppressive thing is you can don't do it on the bus, but do it in the bathroom. Like it's not.
Well, I'm sure. I think boys have to probably be suppressed more than girls. They've got extra testosterone. They've got.
We see in dogs as well.
Yeah, and we do. We see it in packs of animals, not just dogs. But if we use the wild pack of dogs as an example. And I think an example that lots of people don't think about, that most males in nature do not get to procreate. Mm. It's not a birthright to have sex. It's not a birthright to pass on your genes. It's very much a competitive environment. And in the group where you need to survive, they're not competitive. The suppression is used to help reduce testosterone. So we can see it in examples of humans. You mentioned monks before the podcast here, where monks have lower levels of testosterone and probably higher levels of serotonin. And with dogs, it's the same thing. When testosterone reduces, they have more time for play and endorphins, and life is a little bit different. They don't have the stress of having to think about sex or defending their female. So it's a better place to be. But it's for the betterment of the group that we have the differences. If they were all struggling, if they were all competing, they would be individual. They'd be autonomous. They would be not needing each other and having more conflict. But as a group that needs each other to hunt and to keep the territory together, there's lots of strategies they come up with to avoid conflict. And one of these strategies is suppression. So you can't mark there, and you can't have my female. And the things that they do isn't in the moment, but how they interact with each other. So what we try and do is talk about, you can't have me on tap. My body isn't just here for you to just come into my space constantly. And that's where it starts. So somebody had to put up a post about a dog being aggressive on the couch. And of course, all the comments are get the dog off the couch, or correct the dog, or leave the couch, all sorts of strange and wonderful comments about the couch. And I'm thinking it's not the couch's fault, it's the relationship first. So we start with, how do you interact with the dog? We start with where does the dog sit in the social status of the group, not to do with the couch itself. But our society is very much geared to think about the problem. And I would bet money that they probably have an issue with food, but it's not such a big issue when we just go, well, I'll just close the door and let the dog eat in peace.
Yeah. Or I won't ask him I've got this 10-step process to get him off his bed and into his crate in the evening because I have to wake him up first.
We're very good at management. We're very good at doing it. He doesn't like his paws getting, cleaned when he comes in, so I'll just not do that. Whereas when it's the couch, we've all heard, well, the couch can develop into a bigger thing. I'm not comfortable just now because I need to sit on the couch. This is a problem, so I'll talk about it. But it won't be the only problem. There'll be other things. And the root of that is the relationship. And below that is how the dog sees itself within the group. And below that is the humans not understanding group dynamics. But we do understand it with humans. So you wouldn't have a child. So if a child comes to a certain age and it's wanting to sleep in the bed, we would go, well, absolutely not. It's just not
15 now, come on.
No, you're not going to set you up well. So we need to start doing different things. And manners. So you're flicking food around. That's fine to do that here. If you do it in a restaurant, we'll get thrown out. So we learn context, we learn how to behave, we learn to respect our elders. And we absolutely should do the same with dogs. It doesn't have to be about, I'm the boss and I'm the leader and this is what goes. It can be don't do that in this situation, do that somewhere else. But somebody has to make the decision.
But I think this is the problem, right? And this is what we're up against, because if you look on social media, we're getting this kind of two-thing approach where the first thing is we just love the dogs more and everything will be fine. So why would we not all, we're like, that's us as a species. Most of us would love to pick what's nice and warm and fuzzy, and that's why we got a dog in the first place. So I think most of us are going to go, we'll pick that one first. And we tend to hear that most owners have started there. But the flip side of that is that there are very few people that are actually speaking dog. So we're having this now. We come to a residential, you do the Zoom beforehand and you go, you guys are not going to believe us that we're going to tell you that your dog's reactivity to other dogs outside the house is related to them inside the house. And so we're having to have this conversation and convince people because no one's ever mentioned it before and no one's ever gone, dynamics are important, a relationship is important. So there's this kind of flurry of social media where it's like the dog was reactive, so we corrected the dog, or the dog was reactive, so we avoided other dogs. And we're trying to shift this narrative, but at the minute we're like a drop in the ocean of all these other voices, and no one's actually going, well, how would dogs communicate with
without humans being present? Absolutely, that's such an important one to think.
I think is why I keep ending up here with you guys. It's because people can't understand the dog.
Yeah.
So I sit here and go, well, think of it like a person.
Exactly.
And people go, oh yeah. Because actually, like, it is really easy to relate to your own feelings, but it's hard to put it on something whose feelings you don't understand. Because, like you guys say all the time, like the Disney dog, people expect to buy a dog, the dog loves them, the dog lives 13 years of happiness and loveliness, and then the dog peacefully passes away, and then they get the new dog, and it does the same thing. And that's all you have until you decide you don't want dogs anymore, and there's no work and there's no effort, or like you have to do a bit of sit training and a bit of potty training, you get a puppy pad down. And if someone said to you about kids, what you're going to do is you're going to have a kid. Yeah, you're going to have to potty train it for like a month or two at first. And then it's going to be great. And all it's going to do is love you. And it's going to love you all the way until the day you die. Because obviously kids live a lot longer than dogs, mostly. You'd be like, well, that's a lie. Because I know that's not what happened to me. But it is what we expect of dogs. And dogs are animals that we've taken from outside and gone, come live in our house. Also understand this complicated environment. And we're going to treat you like a human, but not like a human, because we don't understand the human bits, really. And it's
a hot mess.
It's confusing, and it is confusing, and it's confusing when you can't relate it. And we see it a lot in mental health. People can't relate mental health to health. which sounds really stupid, but like the amount of times I give the analogy of, if you broke your arm, would you say, I don't want to take tablets for this? Of course not. I don't want to wear a splint for this. Of course not. You'd go and you get painkillers and you get a cast and you do your physio and it would heal. But when people have mental health stuff, they go, I don't want tablets for this. And I don't want to really do the physio either. I just want to know how it can be better. And so we have to say to people, right, look, at the moment, your brain has a broken arm. You're going to go and get some tablets possibly. They're your cast. The stuff you're doing with me, that's your physio. And when you can put it into that terms, people get it. And that is people not even understanding themselves. And then we expect them to understand
Several different species.
dog.
Yeah. Well, we're notoriously not good at what we can't see. Otherwise, everyone would be not smoking. I still have smokers like seeing the street and thinking, why just to be smoking after all the data that we have. So yeah, we're not very good unless something happens right now, right in the moment. And if your brain's worked for a long time and then suddenly it stops working, it's very difficult to see that.
And it happens slowly, right? So this is how we got ourselves into the mess. Is he didn't suddenly start hospitalising us overnight. There were gradual things that crept in, and you play it down, and at first it's not that bad, and he was just tired, and we'll allow that. And
I mean, that is a phenomenon to me, and that the human that we are allows these small things to then grow. It's the same with we all say, well, I wouldn't allow a partner to hit me or emotionally abuse me. Everyone says that, but when you're in it, you're very much like you don't know you're in it until it becomes a bigger thing. So very strong people can be in emotionally damaging relationships where they wouldn't have chosen that, but it's crept up really slowly. So in some ways, what you were living with Atlas, kind of like living in a domestic abuse situation.
Yeah. It wasn't the more work I do with that sort of stuff.
Exactly. It's driven from the humans rather than the dog. The dog didn't have the intention to set out doing.
We just excused it every single time.
Yeah, we got caught. You got caught into. I'm not going to say we. You got caught into the cycle of, I'll need to work on this behaviour, because no one had said to you, actually, the dog needs structure within his group, the group that he finds himself living in, and somebody needs to be suppressing behaviours in a positive way. So we're suppressing behaviours that are not acceptable, showing him outlets for his energy, for his breed, for his specific likes. These outlets will increase endorphins. That's the complete opposite. We're going to try and bring his confidence up with all these things that we're going to do, and teach him these skills. Because you had some of it absolutely right. You had done obedience with him, and you took him up the hills, and you met a lot of the needs, but no one talked to you about the relationship and how social status within the group affects their mental health.
Yeah. And I guess that's where, because we're not saying that there's not a time for suppression. Obviously, we've absolutely suppressed the bite.
Well, it's important to suppress things. Like we say with children, it's important to suppress behaviours that are not politically acceptable, socially acceptable, harmful to the individual. Kids that run into roads, we're suppressing that feeling of running towards things, and we're saying, be thoughtful and bring it back a little bit. But there has to be this balance. So if we don't suppress anything, then we can have some really scary behaviours coming out. But if we suppress too much, we can then create chronic stress. So we have to be thinking about what does the individual, the breed, need in order to be as happy as self.
And suppression is not always a negative thing either. Like we talk about suppression like it's being squashing, but it's not like you suppress. So for example, people with ADHD want to be a lot of the time buzzing and talking and doing things, and they're taught to suppress that by getting enough exercise, like removing caffeine. That is a type of suppression because you're having to suppress things you naturally want to do, but you're finding healthy, positive ways to do it. And that's, like you say, with the dogs, the breed-specific needs, like they get to play and run and bounce, and that suppresses their need to guard and bite because they've then used some energy up and they're not feeling stressed and pent up. That's not negative suppression. That isn't squashing down their emotions and feelings like we imagine when we say suppression. That's removing a reaction by suppressing the energy levels, by exercising them out. And that's why people do it with diet. They don't eat loads and loads of sugar and processed stuff because
Pizza every night.
Yeah, because you're going to be cranky if you've not got the right nutrients. So you're suppressing that negative emotion by eating healthy. And that type of suppression is not a negative, that's a positive suppression. instead of, like we say, like it's not, suppression is not, don't do that, I'm going to sit on you until you stop. It's just making sure you understand the correct behaviours sometimes.
Absolutely. And so suppression doesn't have to be physical. It can be an emotional suppression. And if it does get physical, that's a very, very, for me, scary line, because where humans have proven to me that they don't know how to emotionally suppress healthfully. So trying to then physically suppress. So many of the groups, some of the groups that I'm on, I'm going to mention the Chow Chow one because this is one of the worst ones that I've seen, are still talking about physical suppression of biting the ear or pinning the dog down. So it's exactly the same to me as punishing the dog for being on the couch. If you've created a situation where you have always given in to the dog comes and gets affection, we give it affection. If it jumps on you, we turn away. And we're giving all the signs that this dog is absolutely a decision maker and we are going to give in to every whim. And then we suddenly go, I'm going to roll you on your back and I'm going to pin you down because you did this bad thing. You're likely to get a dog that goes, no, okay, well, I can take you on because we can have a game of physical power if you'd like. Or it's going to absolutely go, you are being very inconsistent, you've frightened me, I do not understand if I'm coming or going. And then you run the risk of chronic stress and having that dog basically living in an asylum where he's not sure what's going to happen next because you set him up to be the prince and then suddenly you're taking the rug from under him.
Well,
that's not sure why.
And that's exactly what we did, right? We're trying to layer on all this physical correction that we've been told is going to improve everything. We're still the most permissive parents that ever existed going, but please love us, but don't bite us. Correct. But please love us and please do this and please come and lay with us but please don't bite us. And if you do bite us, there's going to be this crazy consequence for you that you're not really understanding why or
and then you layered on
anything else.
The physical suppression with that, where even though you were using, the e-call at the time that you'd been told to do, you were layering on that physical so that he's going, well, I'm trying to communicate. Yeah. I don't know what else to do here. And if we think about it, it's really difficult for us to, I think people really get sometimes really confused. It's very convoluted to think the dog growling that me or the dog biting is trying to communicate something's gone very wrong. But instead of thinking what can we do or change, we end up with the dog's done something bad. It's the behaviour I don't like, it's the biting I don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's then thinking about, like you say, the dog is living in a state of I don't know whether I'm coming or going. And then, well, I guess the question for you is how often do you see the shift from we came to you and we went, well, this is what we've done and this is where we're at. Could you just... and then we think about coming back from it. How much harder is it to then come back from that place where we've tried incorrectly to suppress a behaviour versus doing the right thing the right way around?
Yeah, I think it is one of the hardest things for me is the trying to undo all the layers that have been put onto the dog. So the dog's tried numerous things to get his point across, but he's really struggling with how do I communicate next? What do I need to do? As we said before, we get disproportionate energy coming out when the dog's going, okay, I'll behave, I'm trying to keep it down, I'm trying to not do the thing that you don't want me to do. But then my anger's just coming out. And it's hard to, first of all, the first thing I do when I see a dog like that is remove it from the environment. So we now want to create an environment where endorphins are rife. So we need freedom, we need connection with others, we need play, we need breed-specific needs. Yeah. So we take all the obedience away, we take all the stuff that we assume that dogs need to do for us, and we go, right, how do we just get it back to...
Reboot.
Yeah, is it
reboot to being a dog?
Allow it just to be the dog without the human. And I've had Atlas a few times, and I literally did nothing with him. He just cuts about, and I am, but I don't have a huge amount of need for him to behave a certain way. And because I've got lots more dogs, he doesn't have the pressure of having to be best boy or anything. He just gets to cut about. I think there's a pressure off them when they just get to do that in a large group. Yeah. And they don't get the one-to-one time, so there's the con for that. And they have less one-to-one time with the human, but sometimes that's okay for a bit.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's beneficial for a bit, actually. And I think when you're a one-dog owner, it's like this is the be all and end all, and these are the things that we've got to work on. So now I've got to be doing it all the time, try and get back to that point. Maybe that's a me thing. But
we also can escape from, we were talking to the SPC recently and the dog wardens, and there was a point that was raised that, when they get fear of being bitten, that they're taking that fear with them. And somebody had said, once you've been bitten, you're always fearful of getting bitten again. And I didn't contest that, because I don't have the fear. I've got caution, and I'm aware. I don't want to be bitten. But I've got very good at going, we're not going to push that button, and we're just going to, or if I am going to push buttons, I'm going to be well prepared. So we find the right moments to be able to deal with that. But yeah, the point is that the human, what I'm bringing to the situation, the VOCs, the pheromones I'm giving off, are not fearful, they're not stressy. I'm not bringing...
well, the body language is all right coming ill.
Yeah, and so
what are we going to
do? No offence to anyone I've worked with, but lots of people, including yourself, because you're really struggling and you're failing to find the right solution for the dog and for you, you get into a spiral of confusion and cortisol, and the dog can absolutely tell. And not a negative for the dog, because he doesn't know any better, but you are what you're around, so he's doing the same thing. So we need the endorphins to be lifted for both. And that's very difficult when you're so worried, as you know. And so how do I get myself out of the spiral? Well, you need a break. The dog needs to away.
You too.
You need to send her away, and absolutely. And that's something that I think is also part of my environment. I'm not bringing any mental stress to the dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. Same in the human world. Reboot. Take some time to...
No. Different in the human world.
It's much harder to get rid of the baggage, right?
Yeah.
So if you take somebody out of their environment and put them in a new environment, they're still going to be thinking about money problems and job and kids and partner and so on. So dogs are very simple to remove them and go, right, you've got a brand new situation. And because they live in the moment, they very much can be like, oh, right, what do I do to find myself? How do I get on here? Whereas humans will do that, but they will also have the
thinking about all the things.
Thinking. So we have the extra thinking.
The humans are almost opposite. You remove the stresses because you have to remove the stresses to figure out what's going on. But to figure out what's going on, you have to think about the stresses. Whereas for the dogs, like you say, they don't have to. The stress is gone, and they're like, oh, I'll just dog now. Whereas humans go, like, you hand someone a credit card and you're like, for this week you've got all the money in the world. They don't think I've got no financial worries. They might be like, oh, I'll treat myself to all these things, but they know next week that goes away again, and they're still going to have to find...
Or the dog will have higher serotonin levels at that point, because he'd be like, oh my god, I'm the happiest. Whereas the human would be like, oh man.
Well, and it's why in the most depressing conversation we can think of is why dogs tend to, people who have decided to put their dogs to sleep, then go, no expectations, we're just going to have a nice time. You can eat what you like, do what you like. As long as you're safe, you have the best time. They're like, oh, maybe I don't need to put my dog to sleep because look how well he's behaved. And it's like, well, that's because you're not asking anything, you're not expecting anything. They're being allowed to do whatever they like, which if they could exist like that safely, that's what you do anyway. But they've shown us that it can't, because when they're given that freedom,
silly things happen.
They do things like Atlas. Atlas is the king of, if you give him freedom, he acts so much worse than if you give him structure. Like we talked about last time, we talked about it for a year.
I remember what I was saying, when he comes with me, I think that the pressure and the suppression that happens with the pack. So he and Tristan were very much for a while testing, and I think he's now got respect for Tristan.
Still somewhere along the way.
Yeah, so he's when he comes in, I don't have to be that guy because Tristan is the police for the pack, for the group, and so I don't have the same situation as you because I have that mediator, I suppose.
Right, we talked about you as an owner, like if you're going to be a 1-dog household or a 2-dog household, you can absolutely do it, but you have to be everything. Whereas you've got different roles and different characters. Yeah. So he's got Bean, who he plays with, so he's got that fun aspect, and Tristan does the policing, and Baby won't take any shit from him, so it's like they're filling all those roles, whereas we're having to be all, and some of them are still roles that are still very much not genuine for me.
It's not normal for humans to go between good cop and bad cop. So you know, it is very, I've watched people before. In fact, I think my best example is children. When we do, I used to run the classes and we do a leave on the floor, and how many times would the dog steal the food and the owner would be going, no, 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 and it's down the hatch, and then the owner looks at me and goes, oh, he ate it. And I'm like, how difficult is it just to stop the dog? Anyway, the children come along, and really young kids as well, and will just stop the dog. Like, no, you're not allowed to take that. That's against the rules. And they will just stop the dog without the worry of the politics of what everyone's thinking about them. Because the adults wouldn't stop the dog because they think I'm cruel, yeah. Whereas the kids would be like pushing the dog away or making the fall or whatever. And like, no, we don't do that. You know, it's very black and white. And so I watch adults, and I think a lot of this comes from, what will people think of me? Will the dog hate me? Will I ruin my relationship? You know, all that kind of stuff.
Which everyone tells you will. You'll break your bond, and you're like, I don't know what to do.
It's been a thing for so long. We like, you can look at it in physiology. Like, kids can squat down, put their butt on the floor. They climb, they run around barefoot, they hang off things. Like, there's videos of babies that they put onto like pull-up bars, and the baby just hangs there for 2 minutes because that's natural. And then we gradually train all of those things out of us, and we do it emotionally and mentally as well. Yeah, kids will cry if they're upset. Kids will punch each other in the face if they're upset, and then they'll get over it as well because they don't hang on to that. And we obviously have to learn some restraint there, some of that suppression. You can't just punch someone in the face if they upset you like you can when you're 3. But we don't give an alternative, or we haven't. Like, no one says, right, you can't punch little Johnny in the face. But if he's upset you, what you could do is talk to him about it, and you could talk to someone else about it, and you can be upset about it, and you can be upset in a healthy way. And if you're still angry, go and
punch a pillow.
Yeah, run around the block, join a...
Think to all this stuff that you know now about mental health and especially like raising boys, I think you'd be a great parent.
I think I'd be a terrible parent because I think parenting is really, really hard. And like, even as I think of examples for this around like relating it to parents and stuff, the difficulty with parenting is that kids also, you have to, what's the right way to word it? So if you've got a teenager, up to a point, you say to a teenager, when you're an adult, you can make your own choices. When you're a kid, you follow the rules. When you're an adult, you make your own choices. And it's why depression shoots up in teenagers and like early 20s. It's why risk-taking behaviours shoot up. It's why all the negative stuff that's associated with being 13 to 21 happens, is because we say you have no choices. And then we say when you're an adult, you can choose. But sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. But no one really sets that out for anyone. So like, if you've got a really laid back parent, do you know what? If you want to go for a drink, you want to smoke a joint, that's fine. You're like, oh, I can drink and take drugs, that's okay. And then you take a different drug, or you take a drug on a day your parents don't want you to, or you drink one more beer than they're happy with, and suddenly everything explodes. And you're like, well, hang on, I'm an adult that can make my own choices, and I have made these choices, but now I can't make these choices. And it's so grey. And because of like then generational changes and all these things, it becomes really, really difficult to set a blueprint of what you can do and how you can understand those emotions and how you can get it right, basically. I actually think it's a little bit easier in dogs because we know how we can get it right. If the dog is happy and it eats and it gets to run and meet its needs and doesn't bite people,
that comes from the consistency as well, that it does. Yeah. And sometimes I think because we're not speaking their language, we're not aware of the things that we're being inconsistent with because we don't even see them.
No, but that's why I'm saying I think it's harder to be a parent than a child, because you can be consistent, but because dogs don't future plan and they don't follow on,
they're not holding on to stuff.
They're not holding on, and they're also not looking at what they can do. So like, again, so say you're 16, you know you're going to university in 2 years, and when you're there, you're going to feed yourself, you're going to fend for yourself, you're going to go drinking, you're going to go and shag a load of strangers if that's what you're into. Like, you've got all these things you know you're going to do, and you're ready for that, but you're not allowed to do it then. Because dogs don't have that, we don't have to be like, well, we know you are going to do it, but maybe don't do it, but I know you're going to do it in a year. We can just go, we don't want you ever biting people. That's never a thing. And it's a little bit easier than having to say, God.
We don't free them into the world to be
on their own.
Yeah. So, but in some respects, that means that they're always reliant on us, and obviously they're bird-brained, so they don't really get past the sort of 2-3-year-old toddler stage in their brain. But we expect them to behave as if they were an adult human and understand all the things that adult humans understand.
They also don't have 500 other sources of input. They don't have internet input. They don't have friends input. They don't have parents input. They don't have the next person they meet's input. They don't have the guy they met in the bar's input. They don't have all of that. They just have our input and their pack's input if they live in a pack. And if they just have our input, they just have our input. So being consistent is that little bit easier with a dog because...
You think it will?
Well, unless you also have the internet and everyone's opinion and you're trying to navigate that.
Yeah. But the dog can't do that.
Yeah.
Like, we can do that and parents can do that, but also parents, the kids do that. The dogs don't do that. The dog doesn't go, actually, I read an article last week that says you should give me more treats and love me more. Like, Atlas didn't sit there and go, do you not remember what that woman said? She said, buy me my own bed. Like, whereas teenagers will do that and kids will do that. They'll say, actually, the internet says, if I'm upset, you're not allowed to talk to me like that. And it's that's a long round way.
We're never having
Politely easier to be a dog as long as you can speak dog. And I think we obviously have that bias because thanks to you, we're pretty good at speaking dog now. Whereas 2 years ago, I don't know, I'd have been sat here with that confidence to say that, and I'd probably have been like, kids might be easier.
What do you think you would say to if you met Jessie and Sean with Vizsla, with 6-month-old Vizsla, that was behaving the same way as Atlas? What would you say to them was the most important thing to have a think about if they were stuck going, what do we do next?
I would say stop listening to the internet. You're a specialist in challenging behaviour. Why are you ignoring everything you know?
I would say stop hanging all your own trauma on your dog and look at the dog in front of you, not what you think this all means.
Yeah, dogs aren't babies. That's the other thing I'd say. He's not a baby.
Did you feel like you treated him like a baby?
I treated him like a life aid.
Okay.
And I've been very open and honest about it. Like, I was drowning and he was my life aid. Like, you were my life aid for a long time, and then he was the thing that was like, well, now you're not just struggling to stay above water, you've got a bit of air. And I treated him like he was the most important thing in the world, which is a lot of pressure for a 6-month-old dog.
And I was treating him like the void from my parental childhood, so he really had no chance.
Like, you look at it, like, my first bad bite was I was so desperate. I was having a tough day at work, and I was so desperate for some endorphins and some pickup. I'd driven home on my lunch break just to say hello to him.
Yeah.
And you were suppressed and he was depressed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we've come full circle.
Yeah.
So I guess the good thing to finish with is what's next. So if someone's watching this going, this is very relatable, I have a dog that I feel like is suppressed and I don't know how to get out of it, or I feel like might have some examples of what they're saying and I'm not sure what's next, where do they go from here?
Well, we have downloaded some of my brain.
We're getting there. We're slowly chipping away.
So, yeah, I think coming and joining the community to talk to people who are openly talking like this, because you wouldn't have been able to talk like this a few years ago. So, getting help from people who've been through it, I think, is number one. Because I said to you before, no dog trainer in the world could have helped at that point with him. And you, to have you guys speaking the same language. Certainly someone could have taken him away and done what I did. But putting you back together was the sort of trickier part. And although we don't meet many dogs as bad as that situation,
Thank goodness.
I think that the community is for the mental health well-being of the humans. So we compare, we then go, all right, that's worked. It's positive stories, isn't it? It's, I mean, you only came to me because you'd heard that I worked with Vizslas and I'd overcome some pretty major aggression with Vizslas. So we trust people that have done it before. So people that have been through these stories and these overcome these issues. That's where the community is really beneficial. And then we've got all the dog training stuff to go with that, which isn't even dog training. It's relationship building and resetting. And now you're doing, as well as having all the courses that we're doing and working with people, you're also doing relationship reset. So you're offering very interesting. Yeah. So you're offering the talking to the human part, and which is maybe even more beneficial than learning about what you can do differently with your dogs, learning about how you can have a different mindset.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say, like, if even if you think you've got everything together, you probably haven't. And even if you do, it doesn't hurt to speak to someone about it. Like, there are tons of free counselling. There's waitlist, there's always waitlist, but there are services that are available to talk to you about like mental health and stuff. And even if it's that's just getting some clarity on how you're feeling, and you go and you speak to someone and they say, look, you're fine, you just need to
Get out the house.
yeah, go do some bits, like, just so you know that. And then I think I say it a lot in work, and it's probably going to be tattooed on my forehead at some point. Like,
I'm good.
anything with mental health is hard work, but it's not as hard work as feeling like shit. So do the hard work for a little while, and like, you get to have such a nice time after. Like, life is so much better if you do that hard for a little while. Be that anxiety stuff, depression stuff, just general uncertainty. Like, it's hard to make yourself certain as well, and I think people forget that actually just being uncertain of what you're doing is difficult. And so find the thing that works and stick to it, and just believe in that, and it's more likely to work than if you're going, oh yeah, but then someone on the internet said this and someone on the internet said this. Like, don't stress about what 100,000 people think. If you've done something and it works, that thing works, and that's all you need to know for yourself.
What am I supposed to say now? If you've enjoyed listening to this, then like and subscribe. I'm so bad at that bit.